Everyone likes ice cream, at least almost everyone. I sure do. My friend Alan Lacer, he's created this really nice solid brass scoop. He sells these through his website, alanlacer.com. And you can also buy it through the Rockler stores. But most people that make a handle for this are going to turn it out of a solid piece of wood. But we're going to do a laminated one. I've got a really nice board of canary. Canary wood's got a lot of color. I'm going to split the board down the middle. I'm going to make a couple angled cuts. And then I'm going to replace the kerf floss with a narrow piece of maple, glue it back together, and then cut some staves. Take the staves, glue them together into a cylinder, turn the cylinder into the handle. Might get an interesting effect. You never quite know what you're going to get in some of these. Anyway, follow along. Let's make a couple of handles. You've got to have perfect surfaces. If you can't cut perfect surfaces, then you'll have to sand these end grains just a little bit. Here's all my pieces. Here's my maple being cut. Notice it's cross-cut. This is not going to be long grain going against that end grain. So I've got these 4 pieces of maple and my canary wood. It's a little bit of a tricky glue job because of the angle. So I'm doing a dry fit here, and I've got these little keeper cauls on the sides to keep the wood from sliding sideways. Just one technique to glue up something at an angle like this. The glue job's pretty basic, putting glue on all the surfaces and applying these small bar clamps. The spring clamps are just to keep everything flat to one another. And, just keeping an eye on things as I apply the clamps. Once you've got everything put together, make sure you retighten those clamps. Always go back and check the tightness. You can usually put another turn or two on these clamps. Before cutting my staves, this assembly's got to be flat and smooth. So a little bit of this sanding followed by the drum sander gives me nice material to work with. And I also want them nice and square, the 2 ends parallel with one another. I'm using the same sled that I used on the oil burner cylinders. My blade is at 15 degrees and the fence is at 90 degrees. I need to calculate how wide to make my staves. The interior of my cylinder needs to accommodate the post on the scoop. So my goal for the inside is 1/4 inch, and my material, my wood, is 3/4 inch thick. So 2 staves plus the 1/4 inch ID gives me an outside cylinder diameter of 1.75. Now 1.75 times pi gives me a circumference of 5.5. Dividing that circumference by 12 staves gives me an approximate stave width of 0.46 inches. This is where I'll start to do my testing. Before cutting my good stuff, as you see here, I cut some MDF staves using the same procedure. I used some rubber bands, put them together, 12 of them into a cylinder. I also checked the interior, the ID, to make sure it was small enough. Everything actually worked out, perfectly on the first try. Otherwise, I would have tweaked my blade left or right, changed the angle slightly. Now I'm cutting my good stuff. I need a total of 24 staves, 12 for each one of my cylinders. I was a little lucky. My board was 7 1/4 inches wide, just wide enough to produce 13 staves per board. Now, here's my 2 cylinders dry fitted together, 12 staves per cylinder. But I want to rearrange the positioning of the maple a little bit. So by shifting staves left and right and looking at the arrangement, clamping it down with the rubber bands, confirming that all my maple is within about 4.5 inches, I can then go to the chop saw, cut these ends off even, and have a different arrangement of that maple. In preparation for the glue job, I'm going to wrap a couple of pieces of Gorilla Tape around it just to hold everything in place. I'll slit the tape on the same seam. I'm going to use this plastic wrap as my main means of clamping. And for glue, instead of my normal Titebond Original, I'm going to use Titebond 3. It's waterproof. It gives a little bit more working time. For this particular project, it's an ideal glue. I'm using one of my test staves there out of MDF to spread the glue. You got to be really careful. Make sure you coat all the surfaces. To get the clamping started, a series of rubber bands. This glue is going to come flying out of those seams with a little bit of pressure. It's really important that this cylinder be round, perfectly centered. This little reaming device going into both ends helps ensure that one of the staves didn't slip inward. Wrapping it continuously with this plastic wrap does a great job of driving all the glue out. That glue will continue to ooze for quite a while out of the center, so be careful where you hang these. With so much glue surface, it's a good idea to let something like this sit overnight. So I'm cleaning up the outside of this. I'm getting rid of the glue squeeze out here so it'll sit nice and flat. That allows me to put it on my chop saw and trim up the ends, inspect the ends. It all looks good. So now I'm at the drill press, putting a 3/8 hole at both ends. It seems to fit that post very nicely. The combination of a 4-jaw chuck and a cone-shaped live center holds this very nicely, perfectly centered. The first step in turning is to inspect the seams, and then I'm going to start working on this end. I need to fit up this piece of brass. Don't get too aggressive. It needs to be a snug fit, but it doesn't need to be a press fit, but you don't want it sloppy loose. So take your time on this. Once I've achieved that fit, and before I bring the tailstock back up, I'm going to take advantage of the accessibility and get this end sanded. Just one more test. Everything looks good at this end. Before shaping the handle, I thought I'd do a rough sketch just to get an idea of what my possibilities are. So I've taken and put a perimeter of my blank and then just roughed in a shape that I thought would be comfortable to the hand. Now I can transfer those dimensions onto my blank just to give me a series of diameters to link together. This doesn't have to be exact by any means. This is just giving me a rough idea of how to go about shaping this. Do it any way you like. The shape is really totally up to you. This seems to be comfortable, at least I think it will be. Use whatever turning tools you're comfortable with. Use whatever technique you like. For me, I hardly ever use a skew, so this was kind of fun to try. I'm going to reverse the position of the spindle, so I need to get this end sanded before doing so. I'll lose access once this is turned around. Again, I'm using that centered hole for my cone end. The chuck interior holds the post, and I can finish the shaping. Always turn down your lathe speed before doing sanding. I'm going to work the sandpaper up through 400 grit. Now I've got this one hole at the end of the handle. I'm going to turn a plug, vertical grain, a very, very slight taper, which will ensure a nice tight fit at the end. You don't want to rush this. You want a nice fit, so take the time to, turn and check and turn and check. Part it off. I'm going to put a little dent there with my awl. That will assist me when I put it back on the lathe to keep things centered. Plenty of glue, a few little taps here. Let this sit for a while, an hour or so. Back on the lathe. Now it's just a matter of cleaning up that end. And then once I've removed the wood, I'll take my power sander and do some final, finish work here on this end. So here are my two handles, sanded to 400 grit. One's a little larger, but that's okay. I like the larger one, actually. I'm going to use wipe-on poly finish, probably about 4 or 5 coats of this. As projects go, this one's pretty simple, but don't confuse simple with easy. It requires very accurate joinery. These staves are not easy. You have to get them dead on in order to glue them up in one step. They have to have perfect surfaces, they have to have perfect angles of 15 degrees per side, and the dimension on the inside of the stave has to create an opening that's just a little bit tighter than the 3/8 required for the post on the scoop. So, simple, yes. Easy, no. Take the time to dial in your sled setup in order to get these staves just right. The last and perhaps easiest step is to epoxy the 2 pieces of brass in place. I'm using some 15-minute gel-style epoxy. Use it very sparingly. The surfaces have been protected with the tape, and these should sit for an hour or so. But I can't wait to give one of these a test drive.